Jane sipped her morning coffee as her 8-year-old son, Max, ate his cereal. Suddenly, his words shocked her. "Mom, guess what? I saw Dad yesterday," Max said nonchalantly. Jane's heart raced. "What do you mean, honey?" she asked, her voice shaking. "At KFC. He was working there. I saw him when Aunt Jill and I went for lunch," Max replied. Oblivious to the impact of his revelation, Jane stared at Max, her thoughts drifting back to 3 years ago when they had buried her husband, Mark. He had supposedly died in the hospital after a brief illness. Or had he? "Are you sure it was Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. Max nodded firmly. He even smiled at me. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Jane's mind reeled with the shocking possibility that Mark might still be alive. But why would he be working at KFC, and how could this be true? Later that day, Jane found herself parked outside the local KFC, watching customers come and go. She felt ridiculous, but had to see for herself. Could Max have been mistaken? Finally, unable to wait any longer, she walked into the KFC, her eyes scanning the employees behind the counter, desperately searching for any sign of her late husband. When she entered and glanced at the staff, he wasn't there. She sighed in relief, realizing her son must have seen someone else. Perhaps it was someone who resembled Mark, and Max mistook him for his father. Jane left the KFC, prepared to explain to her son that he had seen another person. And would Max still insist? He saw his father. When she got home, she sat down with her son. "Max, I went to the KFC where you said you saw your father. Unfortunately, I didn't see him there, honey. Could you have mistaken someone else for him?" Max looked at his mother, puzzled. "No, Mom, it was him. It was Dad. I know what my dad looks like, and that was definitely him," even though his name tag said Steve. This convinced Jane even more that Max had seen someone else. The person had a different name. See? It wasn't him. "Your dad's name was Mark, remember? But this wouldn't be the last time Jane heard about it. Jane met Mark for the first time on a crisp autumn day during college. She was deep into her studies in the library when he approached her table, juggling a precarious stack of books. Their eyes locked, and Jane couldn't ignore the mischievous sparkle and the boyish grin on his face. "Need a hand?" he asked, chuckling and gesturing towards the books. Jane smiled, charmed by his relaxed demeanor. She had no idea that this unexpected encounter would profoundly alter her life's path. While collaborating on a group project, Jane realized that Mark was much more than just a charming face. He was intelligent, witty, and deeply passionate about his studies. They spent countless hours in debates, discussions, and exploring profound philosophical questions. Their friendship soon evolved into something deeper, and Jane found herself falling deeply in love with Mark. Following graduation, Mark surprised Jane with a romantic weekend trip to the countryside. They strolled through sunlit meadows, their laughter blending with the soft whisper of the wind. As the sunset bathed the sky in hues of gold and pink, Mark knelt down, unveiling a small velvet box. Jane's eyes filled with tears of surprise and emotion as he declared his love and proposed. With hands shaking, she joyfully accepted, her heart brimming with happiness. Their wedding day shimmered with enchantment, a joyous testament to their love and dedication, embraced by loved ones. Their vows intertwined, their love a steadfast, timeless bond. As they sealed their union with a kiss, it seemed the universe itself paused to honor their blissful moment. Their son, Max, filled Jane and Mark's lives with boundless joy and laughter upon his arrival. Jane and Mark cherished the wonder of parenthood, witnessing Max's growth and development with profound admiration. When Max was 5 years old, their world was rocked by devastating news. Mark had fallen ill. It started with a persistent cough that refused to go away but soon escalated into something far more serious. Doctors scrambled to diagnose the mysterious illness, running test after test in search of answers. As Mark battled his illness with courage and determination, Jane stood by his side, her love unwavering and unyielding. She juggled the demands of work and home, pouring all her energy into caring for her husband and their son. Despite the odds stacked against him, Mark refused to surrender to despair. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that Mark's time was running out. One quiet evening, surrounded by the people he loved most, Mark took his last breath. The days that followed were a blur of grief and sorrow. Jane struggled to navigate the practicalities of Mark's passing while grappling with the overwhelming pain of losing her soulmate. When the doctors informed her that Mark's casket would need to be closed at the funeral to prevent contamination, it felt like another cruel twist of fate. His illness was still a mystery to them. Friends, family, and community members gathered to pay their respects, offering Jane and Max words of comfort and support. After the funeral, Jane and Max returned to their now quieter home, the weight of their loss pressing heavily upon them. In the weeks and months that followed, Jane and Max slowly began to navigate their new reality. It wasn't easy. The pain of losing Mark was a constant companion, and the house felt emptier without his presence. Jane sought solace in her work, finding purpose in helping others, while Max channeled his emotions into his studies and hobbies. They attended grief counseling sessions together, learning to cope with their loss and finding ways to honor Mark's memory. Fast forward 2 years, and Jane and Max were doing well until he mentioned that he had seen his father working at KFC. It began to bother Jane every time she thought about it. How could it be? She didn't even get to see him then, since the doctors were afraid that what he had might be contagious. Jane never really saw her husband's dead body, and life had settled into a new normal for Jane and Max. They had found ways to honor Mark's memory while moving forward, but everything changed the day Max claimed he saw his father. Jane's heart sank as she listened to Max's story, her mind racing with questions and doubts. That night, Jane lay awake, replaying Max's words over and over in her mind. The next morning, she decided to take matters into her own hands, and she couldn't rest until she had answers. Jane was peacefully asleep when she heard something that made her jolt up. She groggily looked at the disturbance and noticed that it was her cell phone. Picking it up, she saw she had missed a call from an unknown number. Her blood went cold. Who would phone her this late at night? Then it happened again. The phone rang, but this time she was ready to answer it. "Hello? What do you want?" Jane said groggily, her patience worn thin. There was a brief silence before a voice, soft and trembling, responded. "Is this Jane?" Jane had no idea who was. "Yes," she said hesitantly. "Who is this?" The person on the other side of the call seemed unwilling to give away that information. "Let's call me a friend." "I'm giving you a warning. Don't investigate it any further," the voice cryptically told her. Then, just as abruptly as the call had started, they hung up on her. Jane put her phone down and a shiver went up her spine. Could Mark still be alive? In the days following the mysterious call, Jane couldn't shake off a persistent sense of dread. With each passing moment, her curiosity deepened. That morning, Jane awoke with a strange feeling in the pit of her stomach. She was almost certain that her son was wrong, but what if he wasn't? That morning, she called her sister and asked if she could babysit the young boy. She wanted to investigate the matter on her own. Jill arrived at their house around 10 a.m., and as soon as she did, Jane left. But she had no idea what she was about to come across. The drive to the KFC felt like it lasted a lifetime. As soon as she stepped inside, she glanced at the workers behind the counter. At first, she didn't notice anyone who looked like Mark. The employees stared, waiting for her to place an order. Although she felt sick to her stomach, she simply ordered a takeaway coffee. But she was unaware of the eyes that followed her every move. Jane sighed to herself and slowly walked toward one of the tables, taking a seat as she waited for her coffee. But just then, she noticed the man. As soon as she turned her head in his direction, he turned away, desperate to hide his face. But he was a little too late. Her entire body froze. She stared at the back of the man's head. He had completely turned away from her, but it was too late. She had only seen his face for a split second, but she was so sure that it was the face of a man she once loved more than anyone else in the world. Was it possible that the man was someone who just looked like Mark? She had to get a better look at his face. She slowly pushed her chair out and got up, but she was not prepared for what was about to happen. As soon as the man heard her chair push out from under the table, he bolted. He headed straight for the door and ran out. Wait, her voice echoed through the tiny room as she rose to her feet and decided to run after him. Why was he running? At that moment, she wondered if Max was right. At first, she thought he just resembled her husband, but if that were the case, why would he run? As soon as Jane arose to her feet, she ran after the man, desperate to catch up with him and maybe get a proper look at his face. She paused hopelessly in the middle of the parking lot. The man was gone and she had no idea who he really was. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Jane confided in Jill again. "I can't shake the feeling that there's something we're missing," she admitted. Max was so sure it was Mark. What if he's right? Jill listened patiently, then suggested, "Maybe we should look into Mark's medical records and the circumstances around his death. It might help put your mind at ease." Jane agreed. Jane visited the hospital and requested Mark's medical records. The staff were sympathetic, and after a brief wait, she was handed a thick file. As she sat in the hospital cafeteria, poring over the documents, a sense of dread filled her. The records confirmed Mark's illness and his deteriorating condition, but something caught her eye: a note about a transfer request. Mark had been moved to a different ward just days before his death. Jane's heart pounded as she read further, uncovering inconsistencies in the timeline. Jane shared her findings with Jill. "There's something strange about the way Mark's transfer was handled," she said, her voice shaky. What if? What if he didn't die? What if he was moved somewhere else for some reason? That's a huge leap, Jane. But if you really believe there's something to it, we should investigate further. Machapel maybe talked to the doctors who treated him. Jane and Jill scheduled meetings with the doctors who had treated Mark. Most of them confirmed the details in the medical records, but one doctor seemed hesitant, avoiding eye contact and offering vague answers. After the meeting, Jane felt more convinced than ever that there was a deeper story. "He knows something," she told Jill. "I'm sure of it." We need to keep digging. Jane's determination to uncover the truth led her to investigate further. She spent hours scouring through old hospital records and talking to anyone who might have known Mark during his illness. Finally, she stumbled upon a crucial piece of information: a nurse who remembered Mark vividly. He was moved to a different facility, the nurse revealed. It was all very secretive. Armed with this new information, Jane intensified her search. Eventually, her persistence paid off. She found a retired doctor who remembered Mark being transferred under unusual circumstances. He wasn't as sick as we were led to believe, the doctor confessed. There was something odd about the whole situation. I always suspected there was more to his story. Could it be that Mark had faked his illness and death? She asked to speak with the manager. When the man emerged from the back, Jane's breath caught in her throat. When it was Mark, he looked different, older, wearier, but it was undeniably him. Mark Jane's voice trembled with a mix of fury and heartbreak. How could you do this? Mark's face turned pale. He stammered, searching for words, but Jane didn't wait for an explanation. Max saw you, she continued, her voice rising. He thought you were dead. We thought you were dead. Mark sighed deeply, finally finding his voice. Jane, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you or Max. There's so much you don't know. Over the next excruciating minutes, Mark revealed the truth. He had faked his illness and death to escape his life and responsibilities. He had another family, a woman named Lisa, and 2 children, who lived in a nearby town. He had felt trapped between 2 lives and saw no other way out. Jane's fury boiled over. How could you? How could you abandon us like that? Do you have any idea what you put us through? Mark hung his head in shame. I'm sorry, Jane. I never meant for it to get this far. I thought it was the only way.